So first of all, I want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity to present to you today. And what I want to talk about is instructional design, right? The title of this presentation is From Design to Art. And I want to highlight the basic aspects of instructional design and how it can be used as a tool to enhance our teaching and student success. So just to dive right in, what we'll cover today is the basic question, what is design? I'll talk about instructional design and one of the key aspects of that, which is management of cognitive load. And then I'll talk about the elements of instructional design as it pertains to a course. And then we'll wrap up with a few resources that I can share for further reading. So first up, what is design? It's a big question, and I don't intend to answer all of it here, but just to get our bearings straight and to provide a framework for the rest of the presentation, I'd like to start with one of my heroes of design, which is Dieter Rams, a German designer who is famous for his work with Braun, the technology company. And a couple quotes from him I think highlight the basics of design. So he says, good design is as little design as possible. Less but better because it concentrates on the essential aspects and the products are not burdened with non-essentials. And the other quote I like from him is, good design makes the product understandable. It clarifies the product structure. Better still, it can make the product talk. At best, it is self-explanatory. And you can see here with this example of a radio that Rams designed. It's very minimalist, right? But it's also intuitive. There's no real question as to what it is and how to operate it, right? So when we think of design, we need to think in terms of how can we make products or experiences intuitive so that the user knows what the product or experience is and how they are to maneuver around it. So to dig a little bit deeper, one of my favorite philosophers is Alva Noe, and he wrote an article in the New York Times that talks about the movement from design and into art and what the differences between these two activities are. So he says, when you and I are talking, I don't pay attention to the noises you are making. Your language is a transparency through which I encounter you. Design, at least when it is optimal, is transparent in just this way. It disappears from view and gets absorbed in application. You study the digital image of the shirt on the website, you don't contemplate its image. He goes on to say that art, in contrast, makes things strange. Art disrupts plain looking, and it does so on purpose. By doing so, it discloses just what plain looking conceals. Art unveils us to ourselves. It is an alien implement that affords us the opportunity to bring into view everything that was hidden in the background. So Noe sets up a very nice contrast between design and art. Design, just like Rams had mentioned, is supposed to be transparent, right? Less is better, right? Art, on the other hand, is supposed to strike us as alien, as strange, to make us wonder why this thing is presented in the way it is, so that we can question it and then question ourselves. So, and the rest of the presentation, taking that as our framework, I'll talk about how design is on one end of a sort of continuum and art on the other, and how instructional design is on one end of the continuum, and then teaching is on the other side, right? So I want to talk about teaching as an art, where what we want to do is to make the content that we are teaching our learners strange, right? To make them question it, to wonder about it. That is, I think, the goal of all teaching. So now that we have our bearings, we'll talk about instructional design and one of the key aspects of it, which is the management of cognitive load. Julie Dirksen, an amazing designer, says that one of the main functions of learning design is the ruthless management of cognitive load. So what does she mean here? Cognitive load, if you're not familiar with the term, is a term for the effort being used in working memory. working memory is a finite resource. It's our brain's ability to hold information together into the present, right? So we only have a limited amount of it. We can only focus our attention on so many things before we lose track of them. So there's levels of cognitive load as described in the literature. First, we start at the basic level, which is extraneous cognitive load. Extraneous means stuff that's extra, right? Stuff that's not essential, that's not intrinsic to the task that we are embarking on. Then there is germane cognitive load. And in teaching, germane cognitive load is kind of like the scaffolding that teachers provide students, the schemas that we provide, the frameworks that we provide to help students enter into learning, right? So again, it's not the essential part, but it's closer to it because it helps the students enter into it. And then finally, we have intrinsic cognitive load. Intrinsic cognitive load is the effort that is applied to learning the content that we want students to learn, right? It's the thing that we are teaching, the thing that the students are learning. And so instructional design tries to manage this, right? So when we think in terms of friction, right, in terms of the working memory, we want to decrease the friction on the extraneous cognitive load, on the elements of the course or the lesson that are not important or not intrinsic, right? And we want to increase the friction for the elements that are intrinsic, that are essential, right? And so going back to our framework here, extraneous cognitive load is where most of design happens, right? It's plain looking. We want to make that transparent so that the student or the user doesn't have to expend any working memory, right, trying to navigate through a course or a lesson or an activity. We want to increase the friction on the intrinsic part, right? And what that means is, we want to make whatever we're teaching about the world, right, whether it's from a biological perspective or a historical perspective or a literary perspective, a quantitative perspective, we want to make that part strange and interesting and wonderful so that the student understands that this is something that elicits wonder, right? So that we want to be engaged with it. The world isn't completely designed, right? There's still open questions that we can explore, and we want to engage the student on that level. And I think every good teacher is good because they can do that, right? They can communicate that sense of interest and sort of exhilaration about this topic, right? And so so that's what we do as instructional designers, right? We try to lower the burden for students on all the extraneous things and heighten the burden, right? Or heighten the friction on the intrinsic essential elements of a course. So with that in mind, I want to talk about the basic elements where instructional design interventions can occur. And I've kind of boiled it down to 4 elements. The first one is alignment, right? So how are all the components of a course aligned together, working together seamlessly? We talk a lot about usability, right? Especially with technology. How can we create a user-friendly environment for students? Engagement is key, right? So what are the ways in which we are engaging students, and are we creating the right kind of balance among the different aspects of a course? And then finally, instructional design is really heavy on the technology side, right? So we use a lot of technology in courses nowadays that can distract the attention or the cognitive load, the working memory of students. So we want to do everything we can to minimize that and to make the technology easy to understand, to use for learning outcomes. But all of these rely very heavily on the idea of empathy, right? And so, the basic tenet of design is to have empathy for the student or the user of a product, say, right? We want to enter into the student's perspective as much as possible, so that then we can design experiences and courses that lend themselves to student easily embarking on the path of learning. One of my favorite designers in the commercial space is a man named Frank Chimero, and he writes that the times that design delights us are memorable because we sense the empathy of the work's creator. We feel understood, almost as if by using the work we are stepping into a space designed precisely for us. And I kind of think that that's the ideal of instructional design. When a student walks into the classroom, or into the lecture hall, or into an online course, we want them to feel like their perspective, their humanity has been taken into account, and that we have provided a space and environment for them, right, for their learning.